Alright, so evolutionists will very, very routinely accuse creationists of denying that species change over time. Textbooks will often dishonestly define evolution as just meaning that species change over time. Jerry Coyne, in a atheist convention that he spoke at, that I've made quite a few video responses to, yeah, that's not bias, and people accuse creationists of having a religious bias. At an atheist conference he spoke at, he accused the Discovery Institute of teaching that all species were created exactly as you see them today and have never changed since, which of course is a completely gross misrepresentation of what it's not even misrepresentation, it's a complete lie. And maybe he wasn't lying, or maybe he was honestly mistaken, but it's complete gross. It's not what the intelligent design community teaches. It's not what creationists teach. It's not what the Discovery Institute teaches. So where Jerry Coyne got that from, I have no idea where he could have gotten that from. Had he spent 5 minutes and gone to the Discovery Institute website, he would have seen that that was just completely not accurate. Anyway, so what do creationists teach? Well, anybody who has read Origin of Species will know that even in Darwin's time, creationists acknowledged that species changed over time. Darwin even went so far as to cite the book of Genesis, in which a shepherd, who was a very good shepherd, had been apparently around animals for quite a while, he knew how to selectively breed his sheep. So he would selectively breed them in order to acquire particular traits, in order to make them spotted or speckled or whatever. Being a shepherd back then was apparently quite a dull job, but apparently this guy had a lot of experience. He knew how to selectively breed his animals. So even back in the times of Genesis, people knew that species changed. I mean, this was not an issue. This was not a debate. And of course, God also said after the curse. So after Adam and Eve had sinned and God put a curse on the world because of it, it wasn't until after that that plants started to develop thorns. So clearly we see species changing even in the book of Genesis. And in the 1800s, in Darwin's time, creationists, who were scientists, widely acknowledged that species changed. Edward Blyth, who was actually cited by Darwin, was actually the first person to come up with the idea of natural selection, at least the first person that we know of. And he was a creationist, and he wrote his book. Not his book, it was more of an article. He wrote an article several decades before Darwin wrote Origin of Species, and we actually have Darwin's copy where we see his handwriting in the margin of Blyth's article. Now, I've heard it said before that Darwin didn't properly cite Blyth on coming up with the idea of natural selection, and of course Blyth called it something else. He didn't call it natural selection. And creationists generally think that this was just an honest oversight on Darwin's part. It was an honest mistake. Elsewhere in Darwin's book, Darwin did mention Blyth. He cited Blyth, but when it came to this particular issue, I have heard that Darwin failed to mention Blyth. I did have one person on YouTube correct me on this and said that Darwin actually did cite Blyth on this. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if it's something he forgot to do in the first edition and later editions figured it out, but anyway, that's beside the point. Edward Blyth was a creationist, wrote several decades before Darwin, and came up with the idea of natural selection. Creation scientists today, there's plenty of biologists out there. They're a minority, but there's enough of them. There are plenty of biologists out there who are creationists, who advocate, they're proper creationists, young Earth creationists. They teach that the Earth is young. They teach that species change. They teach that God created all of life during the creation week a few thousand years ago. But it's not taught that that life was exactly as we see it today. That would be that's a gross misrepresentation of what creationists teach. That's a straw man argument. And like I said, I don't think creationists have ever taught it. Do we teach that do creation scientists, which technically I don't think I'd be considered a scientist yet because I'm still a student. Do creation scientists teach that species change? Of course they do. Do they teach that one species can split into two species? Yes. In fact, creation scientists teach one of the thoughts that they have now is that all species of snakes that we see today came from just one pair of snakes on Noah's Ark. Cats, lions, house cats, tigers, etc. all came from one pair of cats in Noah's Ark. Dogs, similar thing with dogs. They all came from one pair of dogs, or there's thought there might actually be 3 different groups that we would refer to as dogs, so it might have been 3 pairs of dogs in Noah's Ark. Things like this. So while evolutionists have the tree of life, creationists have the creation orchard. And I've gone into this in more detail before. Creationists have something that has been generally referred to as a created kind. So each tree in this orchard would be one kind. You might have the dog kind, the cat kind, the snake kind, the finch kind, etc. But they don't claim that these things are exactly like they were. Obviously, they're not exactly like they existed during the creation week. There's mutations that might cause something to lose flight, for example. There are beetles out there that have wings that are unable to fly. Creationists argue that they once had the ability to fly, but they have since lost it. There's blind cavefish that have the remnants of eyes but don't have actual eyes. Creationists argue that they have lost their eyes. I've gone into this in a little bit more detail in other videos before. But creationists pointed out that this is a loss. This isn't a gain of new genetic information. While evolutionists teach that creationists have been accused of, because of the creation orchard, we've been accused of believing in super evolution, which is, of course, intended to mock creationists. But I don't think that's what's going on. I don't think that's an accurate description, because while evolutionists claim that you can develop new eyes, you can in a species that has never had eyes before, fish can gradually develop legs from fins and they can walk out onto the land. Evolutionists teach that something along the lines of a very ape-like brain developed into the human brain, became larger and gradually more and more and more complex in order to facilitate higher thought. Evolutionists teach that mutation and natural selection are capable of doing these things. Creationists disagree. Creationists think that even if you had a group of apes and you were to have a whole planet full of them, so you have like a planet filled with apes, and you were to let them run around and act like apes you could leave them there for 1 billion years. They still won't develop a human-like brain. Same with fish. They would never develop legs as the way evolutionists claim that they were able to. What we're seeing in the creation orchard is not the development of fundamentally new biochemical processes. It's the combination of just shifts in allele frequencies by accident. So you see things like the founder effect. So, for example, you might have a population of birds where you have some big beaks and some little beaks, and sometimes just by chance, you'll have it where some of the 2 or 3 of the birds might fly to a different island or to a different part of the continent, and they might establish a population of birds there. And just because they happen to have all little beaks, all of their offspring will have little beaks. In biology, we refer to this as the founder effect. You also might have bottlenecking, where you might have a population of 1 million birds, and maybe something comes along, maybe a freak ice storm or something that kills off all but 100 birds. You might have a shift in the population there. And you also have natural selection. Like I said, creationists do accept natural selection. So in case of Darwin's finches, Darwin argued that, well, you had an original finch population that came to the islands, spread to all of the islands, and then on certain islands natural selection favored big beaks, and certain islands natural selection favored little beaks or medium beaks, or this shaped beak or the other shaped beak, and creationists actually agree with him. They have the same explanation, but they think that it happened very, very quickly. And we've actually seen mutation and natural selection act very, very quickly in the wild and in the laboratory. The difference, of course, like I said, is this doesn't show where brand new biochemical brand new biochemical pathways, brand new genetic information. It doesn't explain where these things came from. It doesn't explain how you can take the arms of a dinosaur and gradually develop wings from them, or take scales and develop them into feathers, or fins and develop them into legs, or light-sensitive spots developing into a camera eye. And of course, to say that a light-sensitive spot is a simple light-sensitive spot is to ignore the fact that even in the simplest single-celled organism with the equivalent of an eye, to say that, or the supposed precursor of the eye, even in the simplest organism, the biochemical pathways involved in light sensing are very complex. So, while evolutionists think that these relatively simple light sensing systems that we see in single-celled organisms could gradually develop into an eye like we see in human beings, creationists do not agree. That's why the creation orchard is not the same as super evolution, so to speak. So I hope that made sense to everybody. If you have any questions, leave questions in the comment box. Just to go over that real quick one more time, creationists believe in the creation orchard. So you'll have it where you'll have two cats with a lot of genetic variation between the two of them. Remember, in DNA you have 4 letters. You have A, you have G, you have C, and you have T. So A, G, C, T, and obviously those are abbreviations. And for each spot, each locus in the DNA, so that might be the same as saying, if you were comparing this to a book, might say page 3, letter number 25. If you have page 3, letter number 25, you can have A, you can have G, you can have C, and you can have T. So while one animal might have an A in that spot, another might have a G, another might have a C, and another might have a T. Because animals have 2 pairs of chromosomes, one pair of chromosomes, if you have 2 animals on Noah's Ark, then you have 2 pairs. So that's enough to sustain quite a large amount of genetic variation. But anyway, I think that I've explained that more in previous videos about the creation orchard. But sufficient to say is, as hard as it might be to believe, as counterintuitive, you can have quite a large amount of genetic variation in just 2 organisms. And then, of course, after the flood, mutation and natural selection could have produced a lot of variation. But there's no evidence that mutation and natural selection could provide the types of changes that evolution say could happen, like the development of scales into feathers, for example, or the development of an eye from something that never had eyes previously. What mutation and natural selection do is they can cause changes. They might change the shape of the beak, they might change the size of the beak, they might change the shape, size of the eye, they might change the color of an animal's fur or something like that. They might change the size of an animal. We have dwarf elephants, for example, in the fossil record. Dogs are the perfect example. We have so many different breeds of dogs, but all they are is variations on one particular body plan. We're not seeing, they don't have it where Chihuahuas have some fundamentally new biochemical pathway that nothing else has. You don't have the flying poodle that we bred to have wings or anything like that. That's the difference between the creation orchard and evolution, and this really gets down to the meat of where scientists who are creationists and scientists who are evolutionists differ in their view of the world. So, like I said, post any comments, post any questions. If I went through this too quickly, please let me know, and I can go into more detail on some topics. Alright, this is Greg, out.